I was recently scrolling through the oldest videos on Nintendo of America's YouTube channel, because, you know, that's how I like to spend my free time, and I came across this video. Nintendo 3DS Picture Lives E3 trailer, uploaded on June 7th, 2011, a little over a decade ago as of recording. I'm sure more than a few of you watching will already know what this is, but I didn't, and that surprised me because I used to obsessively watch Nintendo's E3 output, especially during the early 3DS era. It was a really unique time for Nintendo. They'd absolutely killed it during the last generation, thanks to the unprecedented mass market success of the Wii and the DS, but now they were facing the fallout of a less than stellar first year of sales for the 3DS, and it was beginning to cause some concern. Nintendo were really having to give it all they'd got to try and win over potential customers, something they'd not had to do for a while. At E3 2011, during Nintendo's main stage presentation, Reggie Fils-Aimé, who was president and COO of Nintendo of America at the time, showcased a promising slate of big-name first-party games for the then recently released 3DS. This lineup included Mario Kart 7, Star Fox 64 3D, Luigi's Mansion 2, and Mario 3D Land, all of which were scheduled to ship before the end of the year. By July, they'd also announce a huge price cut for the 3DS, slashing the recommended retail price of the system by almost a third, less than 6 months after its initial launch. In a statement released at the time, Nintendo said the move would allow the company to, quote, create momentum for the Nintendo 3DS and accelerate its market penetration towards the year-end sales season, when the lineup for the applicable software shall be enriched. These moves did ultimately help correct the course of the console over the next few years, with the 3DS family of systems going on to sell over 75 million units worldwide, and it was host to a really solid library of games. There is something else Nintendo did that year that people often overlook now though. They launched the 3DS eShop. That's right, before June 2011, the only way for Nintendo 3DS owners to get access to the latest games was via retail. However, Nintendo's push for digital wasn't just about downloadable versions of boxed games. They also made efforts to produce unique content for the eShop, from small but much appreciated extras such as 3D versions of trailers and game demos, to fully fledged download-only titles. And especially during these early days of the eShop, download-only titles typically got a disproportional amount of promotion, as there really wasn't a huge amount in the store yet. This, paired with my personal interest in the system, is precisely why I was so surprised to have absolutely no recollection of seeing Picture Lives, either during E3 coverage that year or anywhere else since. Anyway, back to this mysterious video. I clicked the link, and within a few seconds of the trailer starting, I was already sold. It was one of those special moments, I'm sure you've experienced this before, when it really just feels like a game was made specifically for you. The trailer showed a cute and quirky 2D art adventure game hybrid featuring a charming soundtrack and a weird world to explore full of funky fellas and mysterious mysteries. How had I never heard of this? I just had to find out more. After a quick bit of research, I realized Picture Lives had actually released on the 3DS eShop under a brand new, far less phonetically ambiguous name, Freakyforms Your Creations Alive, just a few months after the first trailer dropped. Interestingly enough, the Japanese release date of September 7th, 2011 means that Freakyforms takes the crown as the first original eShop game released by Nintendo on the 3DS, beating Pushmo by about a month to gain that historic spot. Freakyforms was directed by Hiroshi Moriyama, one of the key creators of the beloved but perpetually underperforming Chibi-Robo series. This would be his first project at Tokyo-based development studio Asobism. That's right, Freakyforms was not exactly developed internally at Nintendo. However, it also kind of was. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Moriyama's team worked closely under the watchful eye and supervision of then Nintendo president Satoru Iwata, and with Kensuke Tanabe in the producer role. While you may not immediately recognize Tanabe's name, he's been a key Nintendo figure since all the way back in the Famicom days, right up until today, where he still works as a senior officer of Nintendo's EPD division and as a producer on the WarioWare and Luigi's Mansion series, amongst others. Interestingly, the game's credits also show that Brownie Brown, a wholly owned subsidiary of Nintendo, now known as 1UP Studio, was also involved in the game's production as well, although you can't really see any evidence of that online. In case you don't know, 1UP Studio co-developed Mother 3, and has worked on every 3D Mario game since 3D Land, so it's safe to say that Freakyforms has a surprisingly impressive pedigree. The version of the game we'll be looking at today is actually the second release of Freakyforms, called Freakyforms Deluxe, which added a handful of additional features and modes and saw the game's price rise from $6.99 to $19.99 US. This version of the game also got a physical release, which would end up proving incredibly important for Freakyforms' legacy, but we'll get to that later in the video. The core gameplay is pretty simple. Build a Formy, the in-game name for your creations, and navigate through a 2D level searching for eggs, eating snacks, and completing quests. You've only got a limited time on each adventure, so you'll want to move fast and pick your objectives carefully. The game is played entirely with the touchscreen, and despite the wonky-looking procedural movement of the Formies, the controls feel intuitive. Formies aren't animated like most traditional game characters through predefined animation. Instead, their movements are defined by their form. Tapping to the right or left of the touchscreen sends your Formy stumbling in that direction, and dragging from the center of the screen, then letting go, slingshots your Formy forcefully in the opposing direction. This is effectively your jump, but it can also be used to smash blocks and push other obstacles that may be in your way. Upon starting the game for the first time, you're greeted by a grayscale world, which you're prompted to give a name. I called mine Hexagonica. The story is extremely minimal, told mostly visually, but as I understand it, a mysterious force has drained the world of colour, and it's up to us to return, in my case Hexagonica, to its original, colourful state, while also searching for the kidnapped King Roy. During an Iwata Asks conducted in 2011, Moriyama talks about how his niece couldn't enjoy his previous title, Okari Chibi-Robo, a Japan-only follow-up to Chibi-Robo Park Patrol, as she found it too difficult to play. This remark clearly hit close to home for Moriyama, as it directly prompted the development of a brand new prototype with the specific objective of making something everyone could play. That prototype would eventually grow into Freakyforms. This inclusive design ethos is clear in all parts of Freakyforms, but feels acutely present in the Formy Creator tool. Along the top of the screen is a selection of body parts that can be brought together any way you see fit, then scaled, squished, and rotated through controls that will look remarkably familiar to anyone who's used Nintendo's own Mii Maker toolset before. What's unique here is that instead of being limited to creating a likeness that'll appear on a pre-built body, as is the case with Mii's, you're instead creating a whole creature from scratch. Producer Tanabe stated that the Formy creation process should feel like drawing, and the developers really succeeded in this goal. The magic of building a Formy really stems from how loose and playful Freakyforms allows you to be with these simple building blocks provided. You'll never have to worry about the logistics of how it will move. Want to make something with a head so big that it'll never actually be able to support its body weight? Just go for it, and once you click done, it'll spring to life. No programming or laborious configuration required. It's quick and easy to make something surprising and unique, with the creature creation process often feeling like you're playing a round of digital exquisite corpse with the game itself as your collaborator. When I made Blobish, this funny little dude and my very first Formy, I only had a limited set of shapes and body parts to work with, but pretty soon, through the course of regular play, I'd unlocked all sorts of appendages and created a menagerie of beautiful misfits, including a cat wearing ice skates called Yam, and another very tiny, very snotty bird called Zup, to name just a couple. Unlocking new parts in the Formy Builder helps you to traverse the game's handful of different environments in unique ways, and allows for whole new areas that would have been impossible or at least fairly challenging to navigate before to be explored with ease. The opportunity to get creative doesn't stop at Formy building though. Using the same basic tools, you can redesign how houses, trees, and other aspects of the world look. This includes recoloring or applying textures to the environment itself. I'm also going to take a moment to spotlight the game's soundtrack because it's absolutely wild. Composed by Kohei Matsuoka, the game's soundscapes sit somewhere between Loco Roco, Pikmin, and Earthbound. It features a unique mix of marching band instruments, recorders, chopped and screwed voice samples, and rich chiptune beats, sometimes all at once. Quite honestly, there are tracks here that can only be described as sounding like clown music played by kindergarten children. But I say that with the utmost respect, as basically every song on this soundtrack is a bop. An off-kilter bop, but a bop nonetheless. One quirk you'll hear on numerous tracks is a fluctuating BPM or beats per minute, meaning the tempo of the song changes rapidly over the course of its runtime, creating a lazy, rolling feeling one moment and a hyperactive cacophony the next. It's all very much in line with the rest of the game's vibe. Just take a listen. One gameplay element that came as a complete surprise to me was when on one of my various outings, I stumbled across a mysterious doorway. Upon entering, I was whisked away to a full-on classic RPG-style dungeon, with skill points, enemies, leveling up, the whole shebang. While you don't control these turn-based fights yourself, they play out based on your formie's level and attributes, this was still a level of depth I wasn't expecting. It's handled with the same sense of humour and breeziness as the rest of the game, and ended up being a surprise highlight for me. Also, speaking of the soundtrack, the battle theme slaps. These dungeons are a unique addition only seen in the deluxe version of the game, which also adds 100 new formie parts and a share play multiplayer mode that allows you and 3 friends to build formies to custom prompts and then show them off in a cute stage play fashion show. There's no specific objectives here, instead the focus has been placed on non-competitive, creative fun, much like the rest of the game. Freakyforms really makes use of almost every 3DS specific feature, with Street Pass functionality and an AR card mode to boot. Freakyforms is a reminder of Nintendo's willingness to support development of small, low-cost experimental projects packed with fun and full of charm. Critical reviews of the game at launch were mostly middling though, often citing a lack of challenge as a flaw, and as far as I'm aware, sales figures for the games were never made publicly available, either regionally or globally, meaning it's impossible to know how well the 2 iterations of the game actually sold. I also think it's worth considering the general mood amongst Western video game enthusiasts in 2011 and 2012, as I believe it's quite closely linked with the way that the game was received at the time. It's easy to overlook now as we're in the throes of a Wii-era nostalgic resurgence, but back then there was vocal backlash against titles that were deemed too casual, at least amongst a certain portion of the fandom. Toy-like experiences were often rejected by quote-unquote gamers at the time, who voiced a desire for meatier games and were generally more dismissive of lighter titles designed to appeal outside the perceived core demographic. One thing that is certain though, is that the game has garnered a small but dedicated community, especially in Japan, where over a decade after its first release, fans still regularly share formies on Twitter and on specialist blogs, using the game's inbuilt QR code-based export function to share their creations with the world. Sure, there's been plenty of other creature-creator games over the years, from Sims creator Will Wright's Spore with its tumultuous development, to Magic Pendule, The Quest for Color, a fascinating and largely forgotten PS2 art PG. TM, do not steal, you have no idea how pleased I was with myself when I came up with that name. Each and every game that approaches the idea of creature creation does so with their own design goals in mind, and it's up to developers to decide how immediate, or expansive, they want the creations to be. It really is an endlessly experimental genre, with a rich history dating back longer than you might think. Finding a sweet spot where a player can navigate the imposed limitations of the software and still have creative freedom is an incredibly tough balancing act that more often than not can skew in a way that feels frustrating, either because the player doesn't understand how to build what they envision, or because they feel stifled by the selection of tools. Personally, I feel Freakyforms strikes the balance very well, and it does so in a way that feels effortless and charming. It's 2D exploration and, hey, who cares if it's perfect? Just make something ethos makes it a joy to play, even in 2022. I actually found myself thinking a lot about Nintendo's Switch launch title Snipper Clips while playing Freakyforms, to the extent that I actually ended up recreating a somewhat scuffed version of Clip within the Formie editor. I don't think my mind went here solely because of the immediate visual similarities between the 2 games. While both games look like you're playing with craft materials, something that for Freakyforms is especially emphasized in the deluxe box art, with materials rendered in a way that's reminiscent of fuzzy felt. These 2 titles also got similar re-releases, with both starting life as downloadable titles that eventually got deluxe versions. Even more substantively though, both games had a lot of creative input from staff at Nintendo during development, rather than just a typical hands-off developer-publisher relationship. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's clear that in 2011, Nintendo was looking for cheaper digital-only titles that could appeal to the non-gamer crowd they'd won over in the previous console generation, but for many of whom had not found a sufficient reason to upgrade to the 3DS yet, and Nintendo really believed in Freakyforms' ability to fill that niche. Freakyforms even featured in 2 excruciatingly early 2010s North American 3DS TV spots.
Hey, Aaron, I hope I'm not mistaken, but I think I just beat you.
Guys, check out my snail.
I think you're the only person I know that can get an F in art.
Isn't it time for you to go to bed?
With games like New Super Mario Bros. 2 and Freakyforms Deluxe.
Exactly why Nintendo thought this weird dude bro aesthetic was the right fit for a cutesy game like this, I'll never know.
You guys probably don't even know about Freakyforms, do you?
Oh no, you're a Freakyform.
What's Freakyforms?
That's not real. Is that a game?
What's Freakyforms?
New worlds of 3D entertainment and tons of downloadable games on eShop. Nintendo 3DS.
The game also got representation in Smash Bros. A few years later, in the form of a trophy of the Hapless King in Smash Bros. For 3DS, and a medley track in Smash Bros. For Wii U. The medley track is an incredibly fitting distillation of the overall sound of the original game, reimagined here using real instruments and high-fidelity vocals. It even returned for Smash Ultimate. At this point, you might be wondering how one would go about playing Freakyforms in 2022. Perhaps you're even planning on grabbing it from the eShop as one of your final purchases before the service shuts down for good next year, in which case you'll be disappointed, I'm afraid. Both Freakyforms and Freakyforms Deluxe were delisted from the eShop in all regions back in 2016. This was specifically because of an exploit within the game's For Me sharing feature that could be used as a homebrew entry point, allowing users to execute their own code and install custom firmware on their 3DS. Once word of this exploit, known as FreakyHax, began to spread, Nintendo pulled the plug on Freakyforms, preventing any further purchases of the game via the eShop. However, the retail release for Freakyforms Deluxe can still be purchased to this day, second-hand at least, and is still remarkably cheap here in the UK. I got my copy for £3. As far as I can tell, the price remains low in all regions. It's kind of weirdly perfect then, that a digital game, released as part of a push to cement the 3DS as Nintendo's next breadwinner, and to promote the benefits of low-priced digital titles, probably ended up being the method with which a good portion of 3DS owners hacked their system, allowing them to bypass the eShop altogether and sideload basically any title they liked. A review of a game is often far more a reflection of the person reviewing it than the game itself. I realize that Freakyforms isn't a title that will appeal to everyone as much as it did to me. But given this game's unique development, and its small, often overlooked, but undeniably integral role in the 3DS's story, this freaky game is one that I'm so glad I got to experience, even if it was 10 years late. I'd like to say a big thank you to all the Video Dojo channel members. There are more than 20 of you across both tiers as of recording this, and it is, in part, your ongoing support that allows me to produce videos like this. They are so fun to do, but they also take a lot of time to produce. If you're not a member already and would like to support the channel, you can do so for less than £1 a month in your local currency, and you'll even get a shiny virtual badge and some cool emotes for use during live streams. I'd especially like to thank those who are subscribed as premium channel members. So, thank you to Pegasi X Uwu, Abe Stasiak, Hyperion Link, Mr. Decina, Curb, and Dave Nodon. Until next time, bye-bye!